Somewhere in your city, there is a building whose only job is to hold the dead. You have probably driven past one this week without a second thought. A hearse, a headstone, a folded flag. You know exactly what to do when someone dies. There are rules. There are rituals. A priest, a rabbi, an imam, someone in black robes says the right words, and everyone nods like this has always been the plan. But it hasn't. For most of the time humans have existed, there was no religion to tell you what death meant. No scripture, no afterlife on file. And yet, deep in caves in Iraq, in narrow limestone tunnels in South Africa, something else was already happening. Bodies were being placed, arranged, covered. Something in the human mind, or in something not quite human at all, was already treating the dead as different from the discarded. You need to sit with that for a second. Long before anyone believed in heaven, something was already refusing to just leave a body where it fell. Start in 1957 in a cave called Shanidar, tucked into the Zagros Mountains of northern Iraq. An archaeologist named Ralph Selecki was digging through layers of sediment when he found something that should not have been remarkable and became one of the most argued about discoveries in the history of anthropology: Neanderthal skeletons. 10 of them, men, women, children, spanning tens of thousands of years. One of them, a middle-aged male labeled Shanidar 4, was surrounded by clumps of pollen. Selecki brought in a palynologist, a scientist who studies ancient pollen, named Arlette Leroy-Goran. She confirmed it. Clusters of flower pollen, concentrated, not scattered the way wind would leave it. Selecki's conclusion made headlines around the world. Someone, he wrote, had ranged the mountainside collecting flowers for the dead. A Neanderthal, buried with a bouquet. The idea reshaped an entire species' reputation overnight. For decades, Neanderthals had been drawn as brutish, hunched, half-formed. Suddenly they were gardeners of grief. Here's the twist you were promised. That flower burial might not be true. Later researchers, including Chris Hunt at Liverpool John Moores University, went back to the pollen and found something the original team hadn't considered. Certain solitary bees burrow into cave floors and stash pollen in dense clumps, almost identical to what Selecki found. It's possible no human hand ever placed a single petal in that grave. It's possible the flowers were an accident of insects, not affection. So which is it? Did a Neanderthal mourn with flowers, or did science mistake bee tunnels for tenderness? The honest answer is that nobody knows for certain, and that uncertainty is the actual story. Because even without the flowers, something else at Shanidar still cannot be explained away. In 2018, a team led by Emma Pomeroy at Cambridge returned to the site and uncovered a new, fully articulated Neanderthal skeleton near the original flower burial location. The stratigraphy, the layered soil around the body, showed it hadn't just fallen there. It had been placed in a channel, then deliberately covered. Whatever this was, accident does not explain it easily. And there's a second detail that outlasts every argument about pollen. One of the Shanidar skeletons, known as Shanidar 1, belonged to a man who had lived for years with a withered arm, deafness, and crippling arthritis. He could not have hunted. He could not have fully cared for himself. Someone fed him. Someone kept him alive long past the point where his body stopped being useful to the group. That is not proof of religion. It might be proof of something religion would later try to explain, the instinct to care for the dying, and, by extension, to care about what happens after they die. While Neanderthal researchers were still arguing over pollen, a different site was quietly settling the debate for modern humans entirely. At Qafzeh Cave, near Nazareth in Israel, archaeologists uncovered at least 15 individuals, unmistakably Homo sapiens, dated to roughly 90 to 120,000 years ago. This is not a maybe. This is one of the oldest confirmed intentional burials on the planet. One grave in particular ends the argument before it starts. A child, 12 or 13 years old, was laid on its back in a tightly flexed position, almost curled, almost sleeping. Across the child's chest and hands rested the antlers of a fallow deer, deliberately cut from the skull and placed there, arranged like an embrace that nature could never produce by accident. Anthropologist Arella Hovers and her team also documented 71 pieces of red ochre scattered through the oldest graves at Qafzeh, some of it heated in nearby hearths to shift its color toward a deeper red, alongside ochre-stained stone tools that had no practical cutting function left in them at all. This wasn't decoration by chance. It was color, chosen and carried, laid down beside the dead for a reason nobody wrote down. 90,000 years before any organized religion existed, someone knelt beside a dead child, arranged antlers over its chest, and pressed heated red pigment into the grave around it. Nobody told them to. There was no commandment, no priest, no promised reward in an afterlife. And yet the behavior looks unmistakably like grief performing a ceremony it invented on the spot. Now travel forward and sideways to a different kind of human altogether. In 2013, cavers exploring a system called Rising Star outside Johannesburg squeezed through a passage so narrow that only small-bodied people could fit. At the bottom, in a chamber now called Dinaledi, they found bones. Hundreds of them, belonging to a species science had never seen before. Paleoanthropologist Lee Berger and his team named it Homo naledi. Here is the detail that breaks your assumptions. Homo naledi had a brain about 1/3 the size of yours. By almost every measure scientists used to rank intelligence, this was not supposed to be a species capable of complex thought. And yet, in 2023, Berger's team made an extraordinary claim. They argued that Homo naledi had deliberately buried its dead in that same deep chamber, roughly 250,000 years ago, and that nearby cave walls carried deliberate engravings, geometric marks etched with intention. If true, this rewrites everything. It would mean that treating death as meaningful, as something worth marking, does not require a large brain, does not require modern humans, does not require anything close to religion as you'd recognize it. It would mean the impulse came first, and the theology came much, much later. But other scientists pushed back hard. Researchers pointed out that the bones in the Dinaledi chamber were never fully articulated, meaning the skeletons weren't found in one clean, connected position the way a deliberate burial usually leaves them. Some argued that water, or a natural chute in the cave, could have swept bodies down there over generations, no ritual required. The debate is still unresolved. Published and re-reviewed in real time, scientists arguing with each other in the open, the way science is supposed to work. What's fascinating isn't who wins, it's that both possibilities are on the table at all. Either a tiny-brained hominin was moved by death enough to bury its own, centuries before anything you'd call a god existed. Or humans, desperate to find meaning in the deep past, projected their own instincts onto bones that never asked for it. Either way, you're left holding the same question. Where does this come from? Here's the plain English version, decoded. Grief, at its root, isn't a belief system. It's a byproduct of attachment. Any social animal that bonds with its group has to deal with what happens when that bond is severed by death. Elephants stand over the bones of their dead for hours. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying dead infants for days, grooming them, unwilling to let go. None of these animals have priests. None of them have an afterlife doctrine. What they have is a nervous system that is not caught up with the fact that the other creature is gone. Look at what elephants specifically do, because it maps almost perfectly onto what you just heard about caves in Iraq and Israel. Researchers studying wild elephant herds have documented them returning to the bones of dead herd members years later, running their trunks slowly over a skull, lingering in a way that serves no survival purpose at all. No food there, no threat there, just contact, held a beat too long to be nothing. Nobody trained the elephant to do that. Nobody taught it a doctrine about what bones mean. The behavior showed up on its own, the same way it apparently showed up in a cave in the Zagros Mountains and possibly in a narrow chamber outside Johannesburg. Humans, and possibly Neanderthals, and possibly even Homo naledi, took that same raw instinct and did something more. They didn't just linger near the body, they arranged it, they marked the spot. They may have added flowers or ochre or antlers laid across a child's chest, or nothing at all except the simple decision to cover it rather than walk away. That decision, long before it had a name, was the seed of everything that came after. Every funeral rite you've ever attended is a distant descendant of someone in an Ice Age cave who could not bring themselves to leave a body exposed to the weather. The scripture came later, the priesthoods came later, the idea of heaven, hell, reincarnation, ancestors watching from somewhere else, all of that arrived to answer a question the behavior had already been asking for tens of thousands of years. What do we owe the dead? You don't need to believe in an afterlife to feel that pull. You felt it yourself, probably without noticing. The instinct to keep a photograph of someone gone. The compulsion to visit a grave even though you know, logically, that nothing there can hear you. The strange comfort of a headstone, a name carved into something that won't erode as fast as memory does. None of that requires faith. It only requires the same ancient wiring that may have moved a Neanderthal hand to gather flowers, real or imagined, or moved a hand at Qafzeh to press red ochre into damp soil tens of thousands of years before the first temple was built. Think about the last time you kept something small. A voicemail you never deleted. A jacket still hanging in a closet belonging to someone who no longer needs it. You know it's just fabric. You know the voice on the recording isn't really speaking to you anymore. And you keep it anyway, because some very old part of you refuses to treat that object as ordinary. That refusal has a lineage. It runs backward through every religion you can name, past the point where any of them existed, straight into a cave floor where the pollen may have come from bees or may have come from grief, and where nobody left a note to settle the argument either way. So think again about that building in your city, the one whose only job is to hold the dead. It feels modern, bureaucratic even. Paperwork, plots, permits. But underneath all of that structure is something almost embarrassingly old. Older than agriculture, older than writing, quite possibly older than your own species. Somewhere in your city, there is a building whose only job is to hold the dead, and it has been doing that job, in one form or another, since long before anyone thought to ask why.